The morning was calm in Seattle, the sky soft with mist. And Emily Thompson sat by the window of her small apartment, sipping cold coffee. Her phone buzzed with office messages. But she ignored them. She had been tired lately. Tired of her job, tired of city noise. Tired of pretending she was fine. Her life looked neat from the outside. But inside, something always felt unfinished. Like a door left half open. Then she heard the sound of mail slipping through the slot. She almost didn't check, thinking it was another bill. But when she saw the handwriting, her heart froze. It was from her father, Richard Thompson, a man she hadn't spoken to in almost 7 years. She sat down slowly, her pulse quick. The letters looked uneven, shaky. She ran her finger over his name, trying to remember the last time she had seen it. The last time they had spoken was the night she left home. That night had changed everything. She opened the letter carefully. The paper smelled faintly of cedar and old ink, like the study back home in Vermont where he used to sit and read every evening. Inside was just one short message written in his uneven handwriting. "Emily, I need to see you. There's something only you can give me." Her breath caught. She read it again and again. The words were simple, but the weight of them pressed on her chest. He never asked for help. He was the kind of man who kept his pain inside. She used to think nothing could break him, but the letter told her otherwise. Emily leaned back in her chair, staring at the grey Seattle sky. Rain beginning to fall softly against the glass. What could he possibly mean? She thought. Something only she could give him. Was it forgiveness? An apology? Or something deeper? Maybe he was sick. Maybe he was just lonely. She didn't know. And that scared her more than anything. She tried to focus on work that day. But the letter stayed in her mind like a heartbeat. She thought about calling him. But every time she imagined hearing his voice, her throat tightened. She remembered the arguments, the slammed doors, the words they could never take back. She remembered how he told her she was throwing her life away when she left Vermont to chase her dreams, and how she'd shouted that she'd never come back. But now, after all these years, he was the one reaching out, and somehow, despite the pain, she couldn't ignore it that night. She packed a small suitcase, not sure how long she'd stay. She looked around her apartment, the walls bare, the silence heavy. She had built a life on independence. Yet she felt strangely empty. She stared at the letter one last time before sliding it into her bag. When her flight took off the next morning, Emily pressed her forehead to the window, watching the clouds roll beneath her. She hadn't been home since her mother's funeral. The memories of that day still haunted her. The way her father had stood alone by the grave, cold and silent, unable to comfort her. She had hated him for that. Hated how he shut her out when she needed him most. But now, as the plane hummed through the sky, she wondered if he had simply been too broken to show his grief. The journey felt longer than it was. Maybe because her heart was heavy with thoughts she couldn't sort out. When she landed in Vermont, the air felt colder, cleaner, carrying the scent of pine trees and distant rain. She took a deep breath, the kind she hadn't taken in years. Her rental car hummed softly as she drove through the winding roads lined with golden leaves. Her childhood town hadn't changed much. The same old bookstore near the square. The same diner by the lake. Everything looked smaller now. Or maybe she had just grown. She slowed down as she passed the old bridge where her father used to teach her how to fish. Memories came rushing back, her small hands clutching the fishing rod. His voice calm but firm. The rare smile when she finally caught something. She blinked hard, forcing the memory away. When she finally reached the old family house, she hesitated before stepping out. The wooden porch creaked just as she remembered. The window shutters slightly crooked, ivy climbing along the sidewall. She could almost see her younger self running through the yard, calling for her mother, laughing, the sound of the lake in the distance. She stood there for a moment, afraid to knock, afraid of what she might find. Then the door opened before she could move. Her father stood there, thinner than she remembered, older too, his hair almost white now, his eyes softer but tired. "Emily," he said quietly. Like her name was something precious he hadn't said in a long time. She swallowed hard, her voice barely there. "Hi, Dad," for a few seconds. They just looked at each other. No words, only silence. And in that silence, years of hurt, regret, and unspoken love filled the space between them. He stepped aside, motioning her in. "You look just like your mother did at your age," he said softly. The words hit her like a wave. She nodded, stepping into the house, the scent of cedar and coffee instantly pulling her back to childhood. Everything looked the same. The old armchair, the bookshelves stacked with history novels, her mother's piano still by the window, covered with dust but still there, untouched. She walked slowly through the room, touching the piano keys gently. A faint note rang out. Soft and broken, she turned to him. "You kept everything," she said. He nodded. "I couldn't change it. It felt like she might come back." Emily felt a lump form in her throat. She wanted to say something, anything, but she didn't know where to start. So she just sat down, her bag still by the door. Her father poured her some tea, his hands trembling slightly. After a moment, she finally asked, "Your letter, what did you mean by it?" He looked at her, his eyes distant. "I'll tell you, Emily, but not yet," he said. "First, let's just talk. It's been a long time." And they did, slowly, awkwardly at first. They talked about small things, her job, the city, the weather, but beneath those words, something deeper began to stir. Something that had been locked away for too long. She saw glimpses of the man he used to be. Not just her father, but the one who used to build kites with her, who read her bedtime stories, who once laughed so loud that the whole neighborhood heard. As the day turned to evening, they sat by the window, watching the light fade over the lake. She could see how fragile he'd become, the weight of time heavy on him. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel angry, she just felt sad. When she went to her old room that night, she found everything still in place. The old photographs on the wall, the books on the shelf, even the blue curtains her mother had sewn. She sat on the bed, holding the letter again, reading it in the dim light. "There's something only you can give me." She couldn't sleep. The words echoed in her mind again and again. What could he possibly want? What could she give that no one else could? Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying the faint scent of rain and cedar. Somewhere in the dark house, she heard her father cough, the sound raw and weak. And suddenly, fear gripped her heart. She stood by the window, looking at the reflection of the lake under the moonlight. Her thoughts tangled between guilt and love, the past and the present. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but something inside her whispered that this visit was not just about forgiveness. It was about understanding, about giving something that words alone could never express. And as she watched the quiet night settle over her old home, she realized, for the first time in years, she wasn't running anymore. She was finally where she needed to be. Though she didn't yet know why, the letter had brought her here. But the truth, whatever her father wanted, was still waiting to be uncovered. And somehow, she felt it would change everything again. Just like that night years ago, only this time she was ready to listen. Ready to stay, ready to give him what only she could. whatever that turned out to be. The next morning came with a thin layer of mist over the lake. Emily woke up early. The house was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the old clock in the hallway. She walked downstairs, following the smell of coffee. Her father was already sitting by the window, wearing a heavy sweater, staring at the water like he always used to. His posture had changed, smaller somehow, but his eyes still carried the same quiet strength. He looked up when she entered. A small smile touched his lips. "You still wake up early," he said, his voice softer than she remembered. She nodded, taking the chair opposite him. "Couldn't sleep much," she replied. He poured her some coffee, his hands trembling slightly. She noticed the thin veins under his skin, the faint blue lines of age, and the way he held the cup like it might slip away. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The silence wasn't heavy anymore, just full, filled with things they hadn't said. The light filtered through the window, warm and pale, catching the dust that floated lazily in the air. Finally, she broke the silence. "You said there's something you need from me," she said carefully. "Something only I can give." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes tired but kind. "Yes, but before that, I need you to know who I was," he said. "Not the man you remember, not the one who shouted at you, but the one I used to be." He motioned for her to follow him. They walked to the old study, the one he used to lock when she was little. Inside, the air smelled of paper and cedar wood. Stacks of books lined the walls, and in the corner, a photograph of her mother sat in a dusty frame, her smile bright, her eyes soft and alive. Emily felt her throat tighten. He picked up the photo, holding it like it was something sacred. "Your mother," he said quietly. "She was my whole world." He paused, looking down. "I never told you how we met, did I?" Emily shook her head, watching him. He smiled faintly. "It was in Boston. I was a young teacher. Too serious, too proud. She came into the bookstore I used to visit every Friday. She was looking for a poetry book, and I remember thinking she looked like she'd stepped out of one. We talked for an hour that day, and I walked her home in the rain. She laughed the whole way." He paused, lost in the memory. That laugh could stop time. Emily listened quietly, feeling something stir inside her. She had never heard him talk like this, never heard him sound so alive. He continued, "When you were born, I thought life couldn't get better. But when she got sick, I didn't know how to handle it. I tried to be strong, but I didn't know how to love through fear. So I built walls instead. I thought if I didn't show pain, maybe it wouldn't hurt her. But I was wrong." His voice cracked slightly. "When she died, I didn't know how to live. So I buried myself in silence." Emily's chest ached. She remembered those years. The house cold, his face like stone. The way he barely spoke to her. She thought he didn't care. But now she saw what she hadn't understood. He hadn't stopped caring. He had simply stopped knowing how. He looked up at her, eyes shining with regret. "You remind me so much of her, Emily. The way you fight, the way you dream. And that's why I pushed you away. You were everything I'd lost. And I didn't know how to love you without breaking." Emily's eyes filled with tears. But she said nothing. She just let him speak. "I was a proud man," he said, voice trembling. "Too proud to say sorry. Too afraid to admit I was lonely. I used to watch your life from a distance. Through the photos your aunt sent me, you looked happy. But I could tell your smile was tired. I could tell something was missing." He looked down. "Maybe it's the same thing that's been missing in me." She wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was nod, her heart breaking for the man who had spent his whole life hiding his pain behind silence. Later that afternoon, they walked outside together. The lake shimmered under the weak sunlight, and the trees whispered with the wind. Her father walked slowly, leaning on a cane she hadn't noticed before. She stayed close, watching his every step. "Do you remember the first time I took you fishing?" he asked suddenly. She smiled faintly. "You yelled at me because I dropped the rod in the water," he chuckled. A warm, rusty sound. "Yes, and then you cried so hard I jumped in after it. I didn't even care how cold it was." For a moment, they both laughed, and it felt like time folded, bringing them back to when things were simple. Before anger, before distance. When they reached the edge of the dock, he stopped and looked out over the lake. "I've been sitting here every morning," he said quietly, "thinking about the things I never said, the people I pushed away, and the love I didn't know how to keep." He turned to her, his eyes glistening. "Emily, I don't have much time left. The doctors say it could be months, maybe less. I didn't tell you before because I didn't want pity. But now, I realize, I just don't want to leave without making peace." Her breath caught. Her hands trembling, she tried to speak, but no words came out. "I need something from you," he said, his voice gentle but certain. "I need you to forgive me. For everything. For the words I said. For the years I wasn't there. For the love I made you doubt." He paused, tears slipping down his face. "And I need you to promise me one more thing." She swallowed hard. "What is it?" He took her hand, his skin cold but steady. "Promise me you won't close your heart like I did. Promise me you'll love again, even when it scares you. Even when it hurts." The world seemed to go silent. Just the wind and the soft sound of water touching the dock. Emily felt her chest tighten. Tears burned her eyes. "Dad," she whispered, "I don't know if I can." "You can," he said softly, squeezing her hand. "Because you're her daughter, and because love is the only thing that makes this life worth living." For the first time in years, she felt his warmth, the father she had missed all along. Not the man who pushed her away, but the man who once carried her on his shoulders, who built her kites, who taught her how to see beauty in small things. They sat together on the dock until the sky turned orange and pink, neither saying much but everything being said in silence, the kind of silence that heals instead of hurts. That night, when she helped him to bed, he looked up at her and smiled. "You know, your mother used to say I was terrible at showing love," he murmured. "But she also said you'd fix that one day." Emily brushed a tear from his cheek. "She was right," she whispered. He smiled faintly, his eyes closing. "She usually was," when he drifted off to sleep. Emily sat beside him for a long time, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest, feeling both the weight and relief of his words. She realized she had been holding on to anger because it was easier than missing him. But now that anger was gone, replaced by something softer, something real. She walked to the window, looking out at the lake again. The moon reflected on the surface like a quiet promise. She thought of her mother, her laughter, her warmth, and she thought of her father, finally human, finally open. In that moment, she understood what he had meant, that love wasn't just about holding on. It was also about letting go, about forgiveness, about choosing to stay even when the past hurts. The next morning, when her father woke, he found Emily sitting by the piano, softly pressing the keys her mother once played. The melody gentle, familiar, and healing. He stood in the doorway, smiling quietly. And for the first time in years, the house felt alive again, filled not with regret, but with something stronger hope. And though he still hadn't told her everything, Emily felt it, the story he carried, the reason he'd called her home. It wasn't just to ask for forgiveness. It was to teach her what he had learned too late. That love, in the end, is the only thing we ever really need to give. The next part of their story was still waiting, but for now, sitting there together in the quiet morning light, father and daughter finally shared something they had both been searching for all along: peace. The days passed quietly after that evening by the lake. The air turned colder, and the trees around the house began to lose their leaves. Emily stayed longer than she planned, cooking small meals, cleaning the porch, and reading to her father when he grew too tired to hold a book. Each day felt fragile, precious, like time was thinning around them. She tried not to think about what the doctors had said. She didn't want to count days, she only wanted to make them matter. Her father seemed different now, softer, lighter somehow. He smiled more, laughed quietly at small things. Sometimes she caught him humming an old song while fixing his old watch, or feeding the birds near the window. And every night, before sleeping, he would ask her to tell him something about her life in Seattle, the people she met, the dreams she had. She found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't in years, talking about the loneliness she felt, the love she'd lost, the way she had built walls without even realizing it. One afternoon, while she was reading to him by the fire, he interrupted her suddenly. "Emily, I've been thinking about something," he said, his voice slow but steady. "Do you remember what I asked of you?" She nodded, setting the book aside. "You asked me to forgive you." He smiled faintly. "That too," he said. "But the other thing, to love again." She looked away, her fingers tracing the spine of the book. "Dad, it's not that easy," she whispered. "You can't just decide to love someone," he chuckled softly. "No, you can't, but you can decide to let yourself try." He leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. "You remind me of your mother when she first met me. She said I was too serious, too afraid to feel. I told her love was risky. She said that's what made it real." He smiled. She was right, as always. Emily felt her eyes sting. "I don't even know what love looks like anymore," she admitted. "I think I forgot." He reached out and took her hand, his grip weak but warm. "Then find it again, Emily, not because of me, not because of her, but because life without love is just breathing, not living." That night, she couldn't sleep. His words replayed in her mind again and again. She thought about the man she used to love years ago, the one she had pushed away when her fear of loss became stronger than her desire to stay. She had built her life around safety, around not getting hurt again. But now she wondered if that had only made her lonely. The next morning, she found her father sitting on the porch wrapped in a blanket, the lake calm behind him. "I dreamed of her last night," he said softly. "She was standing right there by the water, smiling at me, and for a moment, I thought she was waiting for me." His eyes filled with quiet peace. "I'm not afraid anymore." Emily swallowed hard, sitting beside him. "Don't talk like that," she said. But her voice broke. He smiled gently. "It's all right, Emily. When you've lived long enough, you learn that death isn't an ending. It's a return." He turned to her, his eyes full of love. "But I can't leave until I know you'll be okay." She took his hand, tears falling silently. "You don't have to worry about me," she said. "I'll be fine." He looked at her the way fathers do when they see through their children's words, a small smile tugging at his lips. "You've always been brave," he said softly. "Even when you didn't know it." That afternoon, the sky turned grey. A thin rain began to fall. Emily helped him back inside, made him tea, and sat with him by the fire again. He asked her to play something on the piano. She hesitated, But when she pressed the first key, the sound filled the room like a whisper from the past. She played her mother's favorite song, the one her father used to hum on quiet nights. When she finished, she turned and saw tears in his eyes. "You have her soul," he whispered. That was her song. The room fell quiet again. Only the fire crackling softly. Later that night, she found an old box on his desk. Inside were letters, faded photographs, and one sealed envelope with her name written on it. She hesitated, her fingers trembling as she opened it. Inside was a short note written in her father's handwriting. "My dearest Emily, if you are reading this, it means I didn't have the strength to say everything I wanted. I spent too many years hiding behind silence, afraid of losing more than I'd already lost. But you, my girl, you were always my second chance. I was too proud to tell you how much I loved you, too afraid to show how much I needed you. I hope now you know, you were the best part of me. Forgive me for not being the father you deserved. And please, live, love, and be happy. That's the only gift I ever wanted from you, Dad." Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the note to her chest, sobbing quietly, the pain heavy but healing at the same time. She went to his room, wanting to tell him she'd read it, that she forgave him. But when she opened the door, he was asleep, peaceful, still. She called his name softly, but he didn't answer. The house felt too quiet, too still. She sat beside him, holding his hand, whispering through tears, "I forgive you, Dad. I love you." She stayed there for a long time, feeling the warmth fade slowly from his fingers, until all that remained was peace. The morning light filtered through the curtains. The lake shimmered softly outside, and Emily knew he was gone. The days after the funeral felt strange, quiet, almost unreal. She walked through the house touching every corner, remembering the sound of his voice, the smell of his coffee, the gentle way he smiled when she laughed. She decided to stay one last night, before selling the house. Not because she wanted to leave it behind, but because she wanted to start again. That evening, she sat on the porch, the lake glowing with sunset colors. She felt something inside her shift. Something open. She whispered softly, "I'll keep my promise, Dad." And for the first time in years, she felt a kind of peace she had never known. Months passed and Emily returned to Seattle. Life moved quietly at first, but she noticed she was different now. She smiled more, called her friends more often, took long walks by the water. And one evening, while visiting a small bookstore near her apartment, she met someone. His name was Daniel. He was gentle, thoughtful, and his eyes carried the same kindness her father once had. They met by accident, both reaching for the same book, Leaves of Grass. She laughed and offered it to him. He smiled, saying she could have it if she promised to let him buy her coffee instead. That was how it began. Simple, quiet, natural. Like two people who had been meant to meet but just needed time. They talked for hours that evening about books, music, life, and somehow, it felt easy. Not like falling in love, but like finding something she didn't realize she'd lost. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel became part of her world. He listened to her stories about Vermont, about her father, about the lessons she learned too late. And one night, while walking by the lake near her apartment, she looked up at the stars and realized she was keeping her promise. She had forgiven. She had loved again. And she was living, truly living, years later. When she returned to Vermont for the first time since his passing, she brought Daniel with her. They stood by the lake, the same one where her father used to sit every morning. She placed a small wooden box by the dock. Inside was the letter he had written to her, now worn and folded from being read so many times. She smiled softly and whispered, You got what you asked for, Dad. And for a moment, she thought she felt the wind shift, carrying the scent of cedar and rain, the same scent that had always meant home, as the sun dipped below the horizon. Emily held Daniel's hand, her heart full, not of sadness, but gratitude. She realized her father hadn't just asked her for forgiveness or love. He had asked her to find herself again, to open her heart to life, and she had, in the end. The gift he wanted was simple. He wanted her to be happy, and she was. The lake shimmered in the evening light, quiet and golden, and in that stillness she could almost hear his voice again. Calm, gentle, proud, whispering, "That's my girl." And for Emily, that was enough. That was everything.